Welcome to this Moonbreaker presentation. My name is Grissi and I'm going to talk about how Moonbreaker could improve unit interactions. I've been studying recently games like Magic and miniature games like Warhammer and other games and trying to figure out what makes the most fun unit interaction and what's the key for these games to stay so successful for such long period of times. In this presentation, I will be going through these targeted pain points. And just to read quickly through it, crew deployment is worth more than abilities and how it leads to limited options to approach each turn, making the gameplay feel very stale. Also, how ranged crew dominate and why that's a problem, and why lack of crews is a problem in the game right now. My goal is to show the value in increased crew interaction and variety, show the benefits of increased use and dependency on abilities, and to explain why this will have a major impact on Moonbreaker's success. So after playing this game basically before release, I've noticed a clear pattern of what crews are the most valuable to be used. In most situations, it is simply best to drop new crews with a passive ability. That allows you or gives you a free attack action every turn, free mobility action every turn, and free access to a unique ability, and usually a passive ability is preferred. You get accuracy and crew blocker, so you can block melee crews from getting to certain crews, or you can simply do certain things to block your opponent. You get a new damage threat on the field the opponent has to deal with right now, so he can simply focus on one crew. He has to prevent the damage from this crew as well. And a whole figure with HP the opponent needs to spend actions on, which allows you to keep your captain alive and allows maybe some more key crews to survive. Like if you drop Beatrice in front, she's blocking the opponent's crews from getting close enough because she's simply an HP blocker and he blocks accuracy as well, preventing the opponent from killing a crew that you really want to keep alive. So deploying a crew is a guaranteed investment. The longer the game lasts, the more value you get, especially since you don't have to spend any Sinter to get the free action and free mobility. So you can always use that crew to block and to do a damage every turn. So in general, the most valued crews have 0 Sinter cost to be used reliably. This brings us to the question, why is it not better to spend Sinter on abilities? So let's just go through what happens when you spend a Sinter on an ability. It increases the total cost of the crew on each use. So let's say, for example, we're using Detonia. You spend 2 Sinter to drop Detonia, and every turn you have to spend 2 additional Sinter to use her ability. So basically, Detonia's total cost is increasing. So for the first use, she is now 4 Sinter total cost, and then 6, and then 8 Sinter cost. So her cost is constantly increasing with every use. The abilities need to have higher value than the total cost of deploying and using a crew. So currently you could use the Detonia ability, or you could drop on Deadeye. And with Deadeye you get 6 HP on the field and you get a 2 damage free action every turn that you don't have to spend Sinter to use. So instead of using Detonia, you can simply drop more crews for free damage. The ability needs to be reliable. And a lot of crews currently in the games have abilities that are very good for very specific and certain situation. Fate Twist is a good example of this. It's amazing to be able to do a perfect reliable shot, but in general your ranged crews are in position to be able to make a reliable shot. So it's very rare that you want the Fate Twister to be on the field, and it's so expensive to use Fate Twister that using his ability every turn is stacks up really quickly. While if you use Deadeye, who already has a really good accuracy boost, that's more than enough in most situations. You already get the free action and you get the ability from using Deadeye. So he simply is a way better crew to be using than Fate Twister. If a crew has no free action, it provides 0 value without paying its cost. It must be worth it to maintain its cost every turn. So let's again take, for example, Detonia. If you don't use her ability, then she is simply a dead weight on the field. She's doing nothing. Well, she can be used to block and stop opponent, as he has a very nice HP to do that, but you could also drop a crew that can deal damage and block, which will be way better and give you more value every turn. So basically, most abilities give less value than simply deploying a new crew. I can spend 2 Cinder for 2 damage once, or deploy a ranged crew with 2 damage every turn for free, like the Deadeye example I gave before. I can also heal a crew for 3 HP for 2 Cinder, or drop a healthy crew with 6 HP. And that's like Stitchy. Like if he heals, you're paying 2 Cinder instead of just dropping a new crew that has healthy and already is going to deal damage next turn. And the opponent has to spend more total actions to kill both of your crew instead of killing only your healed target. It's also more easier for your opponent just to simply maybe stun one target or move out of into cover from a single crew than having to deal with 2 different crews in 2 different positions. So the advantage of deploying a new crew is way higher. So basically, passive crews can be used for full value without paying any Cinder, not interrupting any deployment. And that's one of the key issues with using abilities. Every time I spend Cinder on an ability, I'm not getting a new crew on the field. But since I'm already getting a huge advantage with the passive abilities from these crews anyway, and they're dealing free damage every turn freely, there's no reason for me to use abilities. Or if I try to use abilities and my opponent is not using abilities, I will simply fall behind and lose the game. Here I'm going to give an example just how much advantage ranged crew in general have over melee crews, and also why free actions are just stronger than abilities. So let's imagine here, like we have Exterior on turn 1 against Sax. So Sax can get a free attack, and let's imagine he just hits every attack in this example. He can freely attack Exterior in the first turn and potentially deal 2 damage, while Exterior simply can't reach and tries to move closer to Sax. Then on turn 2, let's imagine he had dropped the Drum Dancer on the end of turn 1. Meanwhile, the opponent dropped Maximus. So during turn 2, both Drum Dancer and Exterior is still trying to move closer and can't deal any damage, so they are unable to use their free action, while Maximus and Sax simply can shoot across the map and potentially do 4 damage, which is 6 total damage dealt to their opponent. Then, during turn 3, the opponent drops a Deadeye, and while you, as the player, will drop Detonia. Now finally, in turn 3, you are able to deal some damage. So Exterior moves and attacks, Drum Dancer moves and attack, and both Exterior and Drum Dancer use their ability. So Exterior gets 3 additional damage from his ability, and Drum Dancer does 2 additional damage from his ability. Sadly, they will be out of Cinder after that, so they can't afford the last ability. But that will be 9 total damage, and we are assuming that Exterior is unable to hit multiple targets, and same with Detonia in this example. Meanwhile, the free actions potentially have dealt 12 damage in turn 3, and they still have 4 Cinder left, but the player that has used Cinder to use his ability have no Cinder left. So even if he managed to hit multiple targets and deal some extra damage, he will be unable to deploy more crews on the field, while the ranged player here that is using free actions constantly still has 4 Cinder to drop more powerful crews or multiple different crews on the field that will be able to wipe out his target. Also, this 6 total damage here has potential already killed Drum Dancer before getting close. This is also not including how easy it is to block melee crews, like with mines or just other crews dropping in front of melee crews to prevent them from getting close enough, and how hard it is for melee crews to surround a single target. So basically, if you don't pay any Cinder cost for Detonia, she is not going to be useless. So you kinda have to pay Cinder every turn for Detonia. But if you're doing that, then you would not have been able to use the other abilities. It's too expensive. Also, even if you just used a single crew here with their ability, what you're sitting left with is less Cinder, which means you deploy less crews, giving you access to less free actions, which basically leaves you in a more vulnerable situation. You're basically weaker than the opponent. So the opponent will simply have advantage because he has more Cinder. So to summarize, even if you get a perfect turn with the melee crews and the ability crews, the free action player will have the advantage at least until he uses all his crews. So when he is out of crews, then suddenly the value of abilities does increase, but most games don't reach that point. So we see here that free actions create more value than abilities. Like Deadeye just simply deals 2 damage for free, and Drum Dancer, while he can go up to 4 damage by spending 2 center, you could also just drop another crew such as Deadeye to get that 2 damage every turn. And ranged crews are more reliable at creating value. So since they can shoot across the whole map, they can just keep hitting melee crews, and they can also just move away from them, making it really hard for them to reach or block them in multiple ways. Usually it's more fun to use melee crews to get close because it's more of a challenge. You can't just do it freely. While using ranged crews is kind of the most, like the least interesting thing to do. There are certain situations to try to get the maximum accuracy and try to shoot between crews, and where the ranged crew positioning is very important and complicated, but most situation it is very simple, and while melee crews are way more interesting to position and try to think how to position properly, especially when you're trying to prevent them from blocking your ranged crew attack pattern or trying to block opponent's crews at the same time while going into melee. Now with these pain points in mind, how does this lead to the gameplay feel like more stale and not interesting to play? Now, in most turns, abilities are simply not used in Moonbreaker. So crews are mostly used in these steps. 1, you just move the crew, and 2, you just shoot with the crew. So like almost always, that's the only 2 things you're doing. You're not also using an additional action, which would be the ability. And in the few situations when abilities are used, it mostly direct stat boosts that make you still do the same 2 actions. So like if you use Drum Dancer Pummel, you're still going to move another crew to do the base attack, or Tarja Rapid Fire to get the double attack. You're still just going to move a crew and attack. So you're always doing the same. You're just moving a crew and you're attacking. The base attack is the main thing that you're doing in Moonbreaker, and there's a very rare that there's a different thing that you do with the units. So it kind of feels like you're doing the same thing every turn. Like the game is just a repeat of the same thing again and again and again. And it feels like you have very limited action to choose from every turn, because there's no reason not to just move and attack every turn. So it's not really a decision. It's not like I'm thinking, should I really use this crew this turn? Should I really move and attack with it? It's more like, no, I'm going to move my crew and attack with it every turn. Maybe with your captain, something like a Steelier, for example, you think, okay, I need to retreat or hide my captain now so it doesn't take more damage. But most of the time, there's no decision like that. It's just, okay, I move, I do as much damage as I can, and I just go from there. So I put together quickly a list with just all the crews in the game. And I categorized them like a general categories, and some of them kind of enter 2 different categories, such as Chuck is in 2 categories here, and Torian is in 2 categories. But these are mostly accurate, like for the crews. So when it comes to fun in the game, like it can be very fun, for example, to attack with Tipu, and it grows, and these passive abilities can be very fun to use. And it is really fun to also interact with your opponent in general. So whatever ability you're using that interacts with your opponent can be very fun. But the thing that is generally most fun in this kind of game, that like multiplies the fun, is when you mix certain abilities together, such as you take let's say Drum Dancer here, and you give Tipu a double attack, so he grows 2 times during the turn. Now that feels really nice. Like you do give him the double attack and you see Tipu grow 2 times. So you use Drum Dancer to combine with Tipu, and then it feels really good to use. Similar combo is with Tarja and Shrapnel. So you manage to get Shrapnel into position to shoot 3 crews. Now that feels really good. But when you manage to combo with Tarja and then Shrapnel to hit the 3 crews, now that feels really good. And now we could even expand on this example, and let's imagine you use gravity from Sax and you get 5 crews into this combo. Then you're using 2 combo abilities to enable Shrapnel to deal a maximum amount of damage. And now that's like, that gives a huge smile. It's like, man, I outplayed my opponent. That feels really good. That's a state that you really want to be using. Similar situations are really much fun is when you have to fulfill a condition. And the condition needs to have a kind of a challenge to use. Fury is a good example of this. Like, you're not going to use a free attack action and you're gathering up damage, and you try to gather as much damage as you can to take out a crew or preferably the captain. But the opponent will be pressuring you to use Furia earlier or try to snipe her, forcing you to use Furia and preventing you to do the condition of not using her attack action. So now that's a real choice. Like, should I go for the condition of to get the +1 damage, +2 damage if by not attacking, or should I use her action right now because I really need to? So Fury is a good example, and it is fun to use Fate Twister for that guaranteed shoot with Fury as well. You combine with Fury and you feel really good to spending the Cinder and doing the action or getting that perfect shot that one shots the captain. Easier abilities like Blindsider is not as fun to use since you're already spending Cinder, so like spending a Cinder to 0 Cinder to get the extra ability is a very easy condition to fulfill. Crosshair is really fun to use because you fulfill the mobile, like you manage to maybe, let's say, use Snarling to immobilize a target, and then next turn you use Crosshair to get that extra damage. Now that's really, really fun. So the point here that I'm trying to make is that combo abilities and conditional abilities generally create the most fun when used. They are like accelerator, and when you do something to fulfill a condition, or you do something to do a combo, that makes you really, really feel good. And the game should have as much of these kind of abilities in the game, including also interacting with the opponent. Because when you're interacting with opponent's pieces or doing something with the opponent, such as Chuck throwing the opponent around or using the burn effect on them or dragging them around, that's really, really fun. But it's not really fun just to use the passive abilities such as Maximus. I just do an attack. There is nothing new behind it, and he just does 2 attacks. That's not as interesting as maybe Tipu that is growing. So like, he's kind of fulfilling a condition for his strength, and Shrapnel trying to position well. But again, using combos and conditions is the key to maximize the fun in the game. And currently, the only times you're really using these combos and the conditions is doing actions you already like. It doesn't change the game state at all. It doesn't change how you interact with the opponent. You're basically just doing it. Let's allow your crew to do 2 attacks, and you're still going to just move and attack. You use Taria, and you're still going to move and attack. You increase the accuracy, you're still going to just move and attack. Same with Fate Twister. You're still moving and attacking. There's no change to moving and attacking. Necrohol is a difference. You bring the crew back to your base, which is more interesting. Chuck throwing is different, which is interesting. Crankbait dragging is also very fun and interesting. But in general, you're just moving and attacking, and that's just the same. Even Tetonia with the area effect, she is more of the fun attacks to use, but you're mostly just moving closer and you're throwing a grenade. And it just doesn't change its game state. Pyro, his burn effect, however, is way more interesting because you do a burn, and if the opponent doesn't drop heal, that burn effect is going to do a lot of damage. And that's more interesting because you have to line him up, you want to burn as many targets, you have to really think about how to use him. He has this nice thing where he goes backwards when you use him also, which is a very nice touch because you then can try to position him perfectly when he's moving backwards. And he really changes how the interaction works because the opponent has to deal with that he's taking 1 damage every turn until the crews are healed. So it might be his crew has an o'clock, will die next turn, so he will play a bit differently with that kind of crew than just using them normally. Now, while the earlier list included all the crews in the game, this list only includes crews that are mostly used, like occasionally used or always used. So here we're already down to 60%, and we already see that most of the crews that are interactive and combo based and conditional are starting to be removed since they're just simply weaker crews. Like it's just simply either too expensive to use them, or their stat line is just not strong enough. And finally, here is the list only with the crews that are simply the best crews in the game and that are pretty much always used. Like we see, there is only 13 of the 38 crews, and that's 34%. Chuck is 2 times in the list, but only counted once in this number. So looking at this list, it's like, why are these crews being used? So Chuck, Beatrice is basically used because their stat lines are amazing. It's not because of their abilities. Tarja and Drum Dancer are used because they can double the auto attack damage on the high stat crews, such as Drum Dancer plus Blindsider is basically 4 damage 2 times. That's 8 damage. That's very nice. Deadeye is just a really good free action. Shrapnel has a good stat line. His armor, 2 damage area effect. Rickety can do potentially 6 single target damage or 3 area effect damage, which is insanity. Maximus is just really hard to kill, 2 damage every turn, really good stat line. And the other things that you see is armor just makes your crew more resilient. Quetzallis allows you just basically to move through the whole map, so you don't really need to think about anything. You just move through the whole map like crazy, and the positional play is just out of the window. And Nectarvine is basically a free healing. So these crews have mostly been used in the game, kind of from the beginning. I guess the armored crews were not used for a while because you just didn't have the Sinter to deploy them, and it was too easy to assassinate the captains. But with the nerf to Vortex and displacement abilities, you cannot just force the captain out of cover anymore, so they are more useful now because positional play is more important. But in general, the crews, like the combo crews that we want to see, the conditional crews that we want to see, the more interactive crews that we want to see, most of them are just gone. And what we're left with is basically crews with a lot of stats or Florio that can basically shoot across the whole map and allows you to hide and cover, which fits the armored style of just defending and just win the game basically with Florio, while the opponent has to move closer to challenge you. And there are kind of just 2 types of gameplay to play right now. It's a defensive with Florio, or very aggressive with Quetzali, to use Quetzali to abuse his movement to basically to kill the captain. This brings me to archetypes. And this is kind of my conclusion from studying different games and also from my gameplay experiences. Like, when is the game most fun, and what kind of design makes the games just last almost forever? And that's where you want to have kind of archetypes, and you can see with every season from Magic they add a lot of different archetypes, and each archetype often is mixed between different factions, and some archetypes are just in the faction itself. Now some factions are archetypes by themselves since they have this inherent advantages, which changes kind of the play style of playing that faction versus playing with multiple factions. So it's same with kind of Warhammer and choosing which faction there, like what kind of crews are you going to use there, and what models, and you could use some special factions there that are like a subsection of that faction. So basically, if I go deeper into what kind of archetype would fit really well with Moonbreaker, I'm going to use Axe Pyro as an example. As Pyro has one of the most unique ability in the game, and has a unique effect that kind of most other crews don't really have, which is the burn effect. And if you think about it, like we have Pyro, and he uses his flame attack, and he triggers the burn effect. But the burn effect doesn't really interact with anything in the game right now. So it's basically like just another damage effect as it stands. But its potential is very, very high. For example, if we would release multiple crews connected to the burn archetype, we could have a new crew that could drop, for example, an oil puddle. Let's get my pointer back up here. Yeah, so it could drop an oil puddle. So let's say the crew will have an attack that drops an oil puddle or a tar puddle. That would maybe slow down a crew or maybe slightly, or in some sense. And if a crew is on a oil, and normally, yeah, maybe there is a slow effect. But when a burn is applied on the oil, it might just start burning. So every turn there's like a flame puddle on the ground. And if a crew goes into this puddle, they will both take damage from the burning oil themselves and also start burning themselves. So they will start to take the burning effect. And then this could be combined with the crankbait that could drag crews into this puddle to deal more damage, or Zack's grab attacks could draw people into the puddle themselves to get this additional damage. So everything like would interact with this oil, and there could be different archetypes later that would also interact with the oil just in a different way. Now, another way to have the oil is just to drop oil over a single crew, for example, or maybe AoE attack that drops on the crews. And if you use burn on a crew with oil, the burn effect is maybe doubled, like you take 2 damage every turn. It has an additional effect. So you could just with the oil itself, you could do a lot of different things. Another way this new crews could do is drop a barrel, so you get a different barrel on the ground. And let's say this barrel has 4 HP, and if you deal enough damage with it, it would explode with an area effect damage with maybe 5. Since you had to deal 4 damage, it makes sense it's at least +1 damage that it deals around it. And it could also be 3 or something. Balance is not an issue. And then let's say you turn the barrel on fire, and it's like, okay, you have a burning barrel, and now you can use gravity effect or something to try to get it into a position where it will explode and also additionally cause burning effects, which is a different way to experience the game. And another way that this barrel could work is like when you do a normal base attack on this barrel, it will move, and the distance it will move will be based on the damage you deal with the barrel. So if it deals 1 damage to the barrel, it will move 1 distance. If you do 2 damage to the barrel, it will move 2 distance. So you could do the burn effect to the barrel and make it move by shooting it, making it very interesting. And then, depending on what implementation, it could always explode if it has a burning effect, or only when its health is diminished to 0. So, like, you would really have to think about, like, okay, I need to calculate the barrel health when I use it and put it in the right place, and the opponent can also interact with it. And you could have special crews, a special ability that will make it explode at the end of the turn at any time. So just by doing this, you have a lot of different archetypes of things to interact with, and there's nothing that says that the burning effect is the only thing that can interact with the barrel. Like there could be tons of different types of effects that we've not thought of yet that will interact with it. Such as you could have a crew that allows you to drop a fake barrel, like for Zero Cinder or something, like can have 1 fake barrel on the ground. So the opponent thinks this might explode, but he spends a lot of damage on it, and then nothing happens. So that's kind of an interesting way to play the game. So it maybe had 2 abilities, a real barrel and a fake barrel. Then you have, you could allow crews to have more than 1 ability. So Detonia could have a burn grenade or the damage grenade. So the damage grenade is a guaranteed damage right away. Well, if you give the Detonia a burn grenade, she could also interact with the burn archetype, which makes you have more choices in a turn. Like you can, should I use this ability or this ability, instead of just thinking about moving and shooting. Also, Stitchy could have a water spray. So instead of healing to removing burn, you could add water into the game. So you drop water on a crew that is burning, and you remove the burning effect, which is really good and really amazing. But you could also use water on a crew that has no effect and just make them wet. So you have a wet crew, or maybe a puddle on the ground that is watery. And then maybe you could have an electricity ability, like you use electricity on a crew that has is wet, and it will take +1 damage, or maybe it will get paralyzed or something. So you will disable it in some way, and paralyze will have some kind of unique effect on the crew. And maybe if you do electrocute it twice, it will have another even worse effect. Maybe it will stun the crew from that sense. Water could also be interacted with ice. So like if you use cold damage or something like that on the crew, it will slow down, it will freeze, and you can do a lot of different effects, and that may have an interesting effect on oil as well. So you should freeze the oil or the water puddle, they might just freeze over, and then you have this interesting fight between different archetypes, and they can interact with different object in the game, and there's no limit on different types of object and things we can think of. Like in this sense, suddenly you are using so many different abilities, you're combining abilities, and the game state is constantly changing. So you're not always just moving and shooting. Like you're really thinking about, okay, should I drop the oil there, the barrel there? Like what kind of game do I want to play? I can really personalize my game, and the opponent will personalize his game, and when the match, it will create this unique situation that is very crazy and create a lot of excitement and fun when everything starts to mix up with each other. This also comes kind of with the assist. So how assists work today is kind of similar to crew abilities, and I feel like the reason why the assists were added in the game, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it's like we wanted to have more, allow players to do more in a single turn. Like there was a limit how much they could do in a current turn, so the free assist allow you to do some extra combo potential. But I feel like the combo potential and everything should come from the crews themselves. They are the key, like the interaction between the crew using the model. That's where the interaction come. But assist will have a very specific place in the game, where it will basically be a more expensive crew ability, such as Stitchy water spray in this example, or maybe just drop a firebomb. So you could drop a firebomb to trigger the oil, or have an oil spray or something. That will cost more center to use than if you had the crew themselves. So it would be like you have a crew, like maybe 10 crews maximum that you can use, for example, and you don't really want Stitchy. You want the Tony in your crew, like you want to use her combo effect instead of having Stitchy. Like you don't want this defensive guy in your list, but you also want to be able to affect prevent other burn effects to archetypes to, like you want to be able to counter other different burning effects, and in that sense you decide instead of adding Stitchy to your crew list, you just add the water assist. So maybe if Stitchy will be using it, it would only cost 1 cinder, but if you use the assist, it will cost 3 cinder. So like you have to pay more expensive more cinder to use the water effect, but you at least have access to it. And maybe the assist should only be limited to be in range of a crew or a captain or something, so it can't just be shoot across the whole map, or it would be just different between the assists. But that would kind of make more sense for assist. So they assist your lineup. You can use it to make it stronger or to counter a different archetype that you are vulnerable to without having the specific crew that you need to defend it. So, and it's also very nice for coding. You code something for a crew, you also code the assist almost, so that's pretty nice. And then you have the captains. And one thing I've seen, like you could have neutral captains that are like they could kind of mix with any archetypes, but card games and factions can't always have this way of enabling archetypes, whereas like you have access to cheaper cards or cheaper abilities that enable your a different archetype to be played. So normally maybe one ability will just deal 1 damage, like you pay some kind of cost and you just deal 1 damage, but with a specific faction or specific archetype you will spend 1 currency and you will get 3 damage, which is way better, but it's only in a specific situation. So you have this very high value enablers of the archetype, and that's where I see captains be very powerful. Like you could have captains that have cheaper and more powerful abilities that enable the archetype. So when you release new crews, you have like the captain that maybe 5 base burning effect crews, and like in this example, and from there you could always add more crews in the future to interact with the burning effect, but at least have 4 or 5 crews with the captain, so you have this complete set to use. And archetypes are not dependent on using the captain, they're just stronger with him. So you could go like a full burn powerhouse with the captain, and then you're like very focused in because the captain is very strong there. Like for example, this captain could be more powerful if it's burning, or burning effects are stronger if he's on fire, but he would be taking damage every turn. So he could have this very interesting ability. But at the same time, you don't have to have the captain to get that use the burn effect. Like you could still use the barrel and like frame grenades to enable the ballers and things like that that might fit, like Sax, for example, who will be using gravity to bring maybe people into the puddle and then explode with the barrel and things like that. So you don't need the archetype captain, but he is like, he creates the strongest powerful burn effects. So it creates like a very nice and different mix of things that you could play. And I really believe it's important that captains could have more, like will not always have one cost and two cost abilities. They could be different costs. They could be more than two abilities even. Captain health could be different. Astra is kind of an archetype enabler right now, but she's like, she will have to be changed if her health is not adjusted. Like her health maybe would be perfect on around 10 to 15, where it's easy to kill her with such a strong ability. But I'm not going to direct into balance. But she is an archetype enabler, and you can have her archetype in the game, but just changing the health values or center values, and you need the ability to adjust them up and down. And the same with other captain archetypes. There's no reason they should all be with the same maximum health and just the same cost of abilities. You could have them very different that makes sense for whatever archetype they're making. So what this leads to is that you are really comboing abilities. You are fulfilling some conditions, and when I'm as a player, when I fulfill a condition and comboing, like I mentioned before, it accelerates my fun, like multiplies my fun. I mean, so my fun factor just becomes more and more and more, and it's like really fun to do all these crazy effects. And as you add more and more of these effects in the game gets more and more interesting and more decisions to do, and things just get more crazy. Like you never know what is going to happen in the next game of Moonbreaker, and there's no limit of combinations you're going to make. And you can always start mixing archetypes together and create very interesting ways to play. And mixed with this, there needs to be a lot of crews in the game. So you need to have enough crews to create the archetypes, and the crews that you create, you can't just be standalone. So you might give a standalone crew just as a hint for the future that you can't really use right now, but in the future you get a very interesting combo. But I want to take an example here just from Marvel Snap, that is the importance of having standardized stat line, and the importance of having crews that have no abilities in the game, because for example, each cost in Marvel Snap has this neutral crew, and this neutral crew is like the baseline. So when you find the neutral crew on this baseline, you see like, okay, for 6 cost I have 12 power, and I can read right away from this, like just as a new player of the game, like, okay, the base stat line is 612, and I can expect that everything that has 12 power has either no ability or has a very, very weak ability. So like if the game makes sense, because if the character would have some kind of like really strong ability and with 12 power, there is like, why would I ever use the Hulk? Because he's just simply weaker. Like, of course I want the ability instead. So he is like the standard number, and then from there you always see like, okay, here's for example a 5 cost, which is cheaper, but he has a very crazy condition, like enemy cards at this location have +2 power. So I am giving my opponent +2 power for each crew there, like unit there. So he has a stronger stat line, like he is cheaper and has stronger stats, because he has a condition, you have to, like a disadvantage on himself. So you have to somehow play around this disadvantage or disable it so it's worth using. Otherwise he's not really a 15 advantage. He, like, depending on how many crews or units that you give advantage +2 to, his power advantage is lower. So his 15 power is not as valuable as his 12 power from the Hulk. At the same time, Giganto, he has like 14 power, but he can only be played at the left location. So Marvel Snap is played at 3 locations, and this means that you always have to have an open slot on the left one, and you're hoping that this 14 power is important on the left location because you cannot play it anywhere else. So he has this condition he has to fulfill to be used then. But because of this condition, it allows him to be more expensive, and it's always more rewarding when you can play some of these units, these cards in this sense, because they are more challenging to use correctly. At the same time, you have other types of units that like are in Sola, which basically I'm not going to detail what his ability does, but he has a very powerful ability, and it's very reliable and it's very easy to use, and for that reason he has a 6 cost and 0 power. He gives you no power compared to the 12 of the Hulk, but his ability allows you to get way more than 12 power. Like if you use his ability correctly, you can easily get like 40, 50, 60 power from using him and really just take over the game. And the same with Onslaught. Like he has a very reliable ability. Well, not the same. Like he has a reliable ability that is not as powerful. So, but his stat line is cheaper because it's how easy it is to use him. But he is powerful enough that he does not get this full power here. So when thinking about the units in Moonbreaker, it's clear that it's very unclear what's the basic stat line for a melee crew, what's the basic stat line for a range crew or a utility crew, and you can see that some crews are just simply better than other crews just on the stat line alone. And Crosshair and Novian Bulwark is a very great example. Like, why would I ever use a Novian Bulwark that has a disadvantage when he has a lower stat line than Crosshair? Crosshair is just simply superior unit, and you can see this issue just on, like, if you look at each and every center level, you can see this issue of some crews and units are just better than others. Again, Arya and Deadeye. Like, why would I ever use Arya instead of Deadeye, or Fate Twister instead of Deadeye? Those are just a few examples. Just as quick examples, of course, the final product will probably not look anywhere like this, but I wanted to do an example of standardized because I really wanted to hit it home, like the importance of this. And imagine when two crews of equal center cost class, and I will explain why this is like it is. Like, there's a reason for this. So right now, I would say, like, imagine there's a crew with 5 HP, and you had 1 damage. It will take you 5 action to kill the opponent's crew. And for my, like, when it comes to the strength of range crews, they should have require the most actions to kill a crew. And then in this example, we will then have melee crews, because it's very harder to use them and get them closer. They should require less actions to use to get the kill. So in this case, we have 4 actions to get the kill. Then when we get to 3 actions to get the kill, that should either be a ranged ability that costs in center to use, for example Detonia, a conditional ability, and this conditional ability could be mixed with the 4 action to kill and 5 action to kill here. So the ranged crew maybe has 1 attack but has a conditional ability. Let's imagine Crosshair, that if the crew didn't move last turn, it will get a bonus damage. So maybe it gets +2 damage because the condition is fulfilled. So suddenly this ranged crew goes from 5 to 3 actions to kill just because he has a condition. And that's where, like, the base free action should not be very powerful, because we want to have players use the passive abilities and conditional abilities to get their damage going. So that's where most of the damage should be coming from. So, and also here is like crews that have no ability. So because the crew has no ability, like the Hulk in the earlier example, then we give the crew like hey, you have no ability, sadly, so you can have more damage because of that. And it has a huge disadvantage, but it's more powerful with its free action. Then you have the 2 actions to kill, and here we're going with like melee abilities that cost center to use. For a good example would be the Gauntlet. The name escapes me right now. That it gets first strike and +3 damage. That costs 1, and by going up to 4 damage, it's fine for him to be able to kill in 2 actions, because he's spending center for the ability. He had to get to melee range to use the ability, so it makes sense he has this cost. So it will only take these kind of abilities 2 actions to kill. And highly conditional ability, that a condition that is very hard to fulfill. Like, I guess right now Crosshair's ability is pretty hard to fulfill, but it could be, I would prefer it would be a different one. But it's like a very difficult condition to fulfill, but allow you 2 actions to kill. and then a disadvantage if a condition is not met. So if you do not meet the condition of your unit, it will actually make the game harder for you. And maybe it's a utility crew that has no ability, so like you can't use his ability. Well, you can have a useless crew that you spend cinder on the field that is taking a screw slot, so you have a disadvantage because of that. Or maybe that crew is just is like, if you did not deal damage to an opponent this turn, your captain takes 5 damage. It's like, man, I really need that crew, like this melee crew, to deal damage to the opponent, and it's very powerful. But it's like, if I don't, my captain takes 5 damage, and that's a problem. So the opponent can just immobilize that melee crew, and then your captain is going to die because of that. But so he deserves a lot of power. And then one action to kill will be a huge disadvantage. For example, you could have a 2-cost crew that has 6 damage. And like 2 cinder for 6 damage, that's a lot of damage, and he can one-shot crews, but he is also immobilized, and it's impossible for anyone to remove immobilized. Maybe it's like he is just an immobilized crew, so you have to use gravity or some way to get them close so they can attack. Otherwise, he's just useless. So that's another way for that kind of condition to work, like a very high disadvantage. But most of the damage in general should not come from the crew themselves, like individually. Like you want to get the player to use multiple crews. So combining different crews to get the condition right. Again, like just Snarelink and Crosshair together, getting that free crit on a mobilized crew, like that should be where the damage is in the game. Or when you actually combine different abilities, like the barrels and pushing the barrel into the right location and shooting it and it explodes, that should be a high amount of damage. So where you're investing a lot of cinder. So you invest in cinder, you fulfill the conditions, and boom, now you're destroying crews. You're not just damaging it. While the free actions themselves, they are just kind of trash. Like range crews will be just be dealing 1 damage, melee crews maybe 2. They are nothing special because you don't have to put any effort into using these abilities, while the abilities where you have to think and combine, they give you the huge reward. And man, that is really, really, really fun to get. Like you get the perfect combinations, you get the conditions, like I earned this, take that, that feels good. While I moved and attacked you, I dealt like 5 damage. It's like, yay, that was fun. Like maybe first time around, but after 20, 30 times playing the game, it's like, nah, that wasn't that interesting. We have different types of crews that have maybe healing, or like Fate Twister that gives guaranteed damage, or like a lot of different kind of abilities. So how would you measure those? Like they're not dependent on action to kill. And then we go by a different measurement, like the highest stats will be given to those who have a disadvantage built in their ability, or heavy condition in their ability, while higher stats is for the ones that have no ability and conditional abilities, or they could also call this standard one. It's just, I said higher here because there's no ability. And standard should be a situational ability or situational advantage at a cost. So ability that you have to be in very specific situation to be used, and because of that, most of the time you're not going to be able to use this ability, and for that reason this crew has a really good stat line. Or the situation like when you drop the crew, it has like 1 extra damage compared to other crews. So like it has an ability to, like after its free attack, it can maybe deal extra 2 damage for 1 cinder. It's like, okay, this crew has more damage than normal on this range, or maybe a passive that increases the damage. And for that reason, but like as soon as you get a bit later in the game, that advantage is going to be nullified in some sense. So that's where this comes in. Lowered stat would be when you have a reliable ability, such as Deadeye. Deadeye has an ability that can be used in every situation because increased accuracy is really good. So he has a reliable ability, so his stat line should be lower because of that, because he can use his ability at any point. And it's also if you have a reliable advantage at cost. So I guess my example here as standard, the stat was not the best one. This should be a situational advantage, which should not include damage. It would more be like a Fate Twister ability that would not be as Fate Twister. I don't have a good example right now, but a reliable advantage would be like Drum Dancer or Tarja. Like you have a very reliable way to get the extra damage, and because of that, their stat line should be lower because they can double the damage of any ranged or melee crew at any point. So there's no reason for them to have higher stats. And then the lowest stat should be scalable abilities and most powerful abilities. So if you have a crew that is really strong throughout the whole game or scales, maybe gets +1 damage every turn or something like that, excuse me, something like that, then it should have a lower stat line to begin with, so you can punish that crew, but it gets always better and better and better and better. And the same with the most powerful abilities in the game. Like if you have an ability that just, okay, I just do this and it deals 6 damage or something, like I just destroy whatever at the same cinder cost. Well, like, or maybe just throughout the whole game, like this. I guess the aura crews are a good example of this, like Kosali and Shield Generator. Yes, I don't remember the correct name. I think the shield, at least the one that gives +1 armor to everything. The Defense Dome. These are the most powerful abilities right now, and like these should have lower stat line and be pretty easy to kill. So you have to position it correctly because it's giving you a free advantage every turn, and it's really, really, really powerful. This brings me back to our first slide with the targeted pain points and targeted goals. So in conclusion, like the crew deployment is worth more than abilities and how it leads to limited options to approach each turn, making the gameplay stale. So the gameplay is stale because you're just basically moving and attacking every turn, and when you're using using abilities is kind of too expensive to be used. So it's much better to ignore the abilities, just do move and attack, move and attack. And right now, even if you use abilities, they're not changing the gameplay state in any sense on how you interact with the game or the opponent. It's mostly just still move and attack, move and attack. And that's what makes the game feel stale. Ranged crews are dominating, and the problem with that is they have just too many stats. So why spend center on abilities, or why spend why should I even try to use a lot of melee crews when I can just get guaranteed free damage from range? In that sense, range crews should be more supportive most of the time until you get to the higher center cost, or if they have a high condition to be used, and use more melee crews that are more interesting to be used in the game, because range crew are mostly just move and shoot, and that's very simple, while melee crews at least have an inherent requirement of getting close and positioning themselves well that makes the game more interesting. And why the lack of crews is a problem. It makes like the game lacks combinations, it lacks archetypes, it lacks different ways to interact, like to create different types of ways to play it in the game. So not only are we having a problem with the lack of crews that are really good at being used right now, there are just simply lack of crews and captains to create this variety in the gameplay itself. So when it came to the goal, I showed like why it's important to increase the variety of the crews, the importance of like how it multiplies the damage, and why it's important to have the crews interact with each other, and why it's most fun to interact with their opponent. I also showed the benefits of like why we should move towards the way of more uses of abilities, so there's more dependency on the abilities to be used, and the damage should be coming from the abilities. This might require some kind of rework on the economy itself, or a change there, I'm not sure, but at least using the abilities should be more beneficial than using the free attacks. That's for that should always be clear. And in general, deploying a crew or using abilities should be a question, but deploying crew should simply not be like the best choice like 95% of the time. And the reason why this will have a major impact on Moonbreaker's success is that this is a game about crews and interacting with each other. And right now it's kind of limiting because most of the time you're just moving and shooting again with the crews. But like having the crews change the gameplay state, combination and really interacting with each other and the opponent, you really make the core of the game really shine and brings up all the best part of the game. And then you add the objectives and other things into the game on top of that, that just multiplies the fun that is already at the core. I have a bit of worry that if we just add objectives and things right now, the game is going to feel just as stale, even though it's an improvement to the gameplay state. We just don't have enough ways to make the crews interact with each other to really make the game shine as much as it could be. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. I was not expecting it to be what I'm close to an hour right now. So I just thank you for listening all the way. I hope this has been helpful and to you, whoever is listening, and has made you more aware of the various issues in Moonbreaker Live right now, the pain points, and at least to the potential of the game. Because when I imagine just interacting with the crews and all the abilities and archetypes, I can't stop. I can't stop myself from smiling. It's so interesting, and the game has so much potential that it's mind blowing, and I'm very exciting and hoping that the game reaches that state. So, well, I guess making a 1 hour presentation shows that I'm really passionate. I really want this game to succeed. And again, thank you for listening. Please throw some feedback here in the comments on Discord or anywhere, and feel free to message me or have a discussion. I'd love to have a discussion about this and find ways to improve it to even a higher level, because I'm sure I rambled. I could be more clear here in some points, so ask me if you need clarity. And I'm sure I missed some points in this presentation, and some of you might have really good suggestion. Maybe you have a great suggestion we could give the developers to help them make the game even better. So yes, enough of that. Thank you. Have a moon-tastic day, and see you soon on the battlefield or something like that. Yes. Bye bye.